Good morning. We are here today with Dan Goldstein of Cannabis Privacy and Security.com, which is quite a mouthful. So Dan, welcome, and we appreciate you spending some time with us. Can you tell us a little bit about when you started the business and why you started it?
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I've been consulting in the privacy and data security area for many years, and just recently started Cannabis Privacy and Security because we've seen a need in that industry, which I believe isn't even recognized so much by a lot of the people in the industry. And that need is a need to not only protect the data of purchasers, in particular of cannabis products, but also to make sure that they're informed of the use of their data and that you're protecting the rights that they have.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen, in Europe, we've seen the GDPR that, has it. We've seen California enact privacy laws and the right to be removed and the right to be forgotten. And yet I would think that most small operators, for the most part, probably are not in compliance.
Yeah, that's right. And, it depends on, you mentioned small operators. And so a lot of small operators probably figure they can fly under the radar, and they may be right, but if they do get caught and there is scrutiny in this area, then there could be problems. So the California law, CCPA, California Consumer Privacy Act, it only applies to certain businesses. One of the thresholds is $25 million in revenue. And, there may be quite a number of small dispensaries in particular that don't hit that bar, and they may think that they're not subject to any compliance obligations. But in fact, there's something called the FTC Act, Federal Trade Commission Act, and Section 5 of that act prohibits deceptive business practices. And if you are not informing an individual of the use of their data, and you're using it for purposes they're not aware of, that could be seen as unfair or deceptive. So that's one issue, even if you're not subject to a law like CCPA. Another is the various breach notification laws around the country. So there's a breach notification law.
I was going to say, one of the big challenges that we're seeing is a lot of the dispensaries are using SMS and in violation of the disclosure laws, because in order to do that, they need to get consent. And they don't, the consumers don't particularly mind it, but in reality, they're not in compliance.
Yeah, that's right. And, that's all fine until the consumers do mind. And the question is, what's going to trigger that? It might be the fact that they're getting inundated with SMS messages. It might be that somebody's capturing data from those SMS messages and they're going to disclose it. And that's a big issue, because if there is a disclosure of this data, obviously, even though in the US we're seeing that cannabis is more and more accepted and some of the taboo associated with it is fading away, still, if there's a breach of that data or an unauthorized disclosure of that data, it can impact people's employment, it can impact their ability to get insurance, and any number of other kind of reputational factors. So keeping that data secure becomes really important.
Yeah, I mean, it's still not legal on the federal level, so there's still that concern. Right? Exactly. I mean, and the other particularly big piece is the fact that if this is being used as a medicinal product, then that puts you in a totally different classification as far as the data.
Yeah, that's right. So if you're in a state where it's legal for medicinal purposes, or even in California, for example, I know some of the counties in California, while it's legal on the state level recreationally, some counties are limiting it to medicinal. So if you're a dispensary and you're medicinal, then you've got HIPAA requirements. If you're collecting health information, which you would be in this instance, then there's a whole slew of requirements, privacy and data security requirements around HIPAA that you need to comply with.
And what are the big sort of cybersecurity challenges that are facing the industry?
So, we've seen some breaches to date where personal data has been exposed. And I mean, that's the big cybersecurity challenge, like in a very small nutshell, is that you're going to be breached and data is going to be exposed. Now, when you dig into that a little bit deeper, this is a burgeoning industry. Dispensaries in particular are gathering a lot of information about individuals, right? So they're gathering driver's license information when somebody enters a dispensary. They're gathering purchase information. They're possibly building profiles of individuals so that they can support loyalty programs. And when you're gathering that much data, you know, the bad actors out there who for years now have been perpetrating these breaches, they're going to start to pay attention. And so the cybersecurity risk is just that the more and more data an industry is collecting, the more attractive it's going to be to a bad actor. And, you know, it's not only to obtain that data, maybe sell that data, or expose that data, but it's also things like ransomware. And we're seeing a lot of ransomware just across industry, not just cannabis, but across the, you know, multiple industries. We read about it in the news all the time.
And we're also seeing a lot more bigger players, right? So we're aggregating more data into one place, right? You know, we're seeing the Tilrays and some of those other companies. So if any of those smaller entities are dealing with the bigger entities, they're likely sharing the data.
And that's another really good point. The smaller entities that are sharing their data with the bigger entities, they really should be doing diligence before they share that data to make sure the bigger entities are able to secure it appropriately. So, you know, questions that they might want to ask is, how is that data making its way over to these bigger entities? Is there a secure tunnel? Is there VPN? Is it encrypted along the way? Is that larger entity encrypting the data when it's at rest with them? Are they sharing it further with other companies? So all of those questions should be asked, because if it's your data originally, so if you're the dispensary and you're sharing it with a third party and that third party is breached, there's a good chance that some of the liability or responsibility is going to flow back to you.
And then how do they go about beginning to protect themselves? Hiring you, obviously, but you know, tell us more.
Yeah, so there are a number of things that should be done. I mean, the first thing is you want to be transparent with your customers about what you're doing. So that means that when they enter your dispensary, there should be privacy notice that's available to them, particularly if you're collecting information just upon entering. So if you're collecting driver's license information, they should be aware that you're doing that. There are questions about the effectiveness of notice, because some dispensaries may just post something that nobody's going to read, but there should be an effort to make sure that they're aware of what's going to be done with the data. And then if you are doing things like tracking purchases, so there are point of sale systems that automatically track and compile purchase information, and there are loyalty programs. The loyalty programs in particular, those should be opt-in, right? People should not suddenly be receiving emails from a dispensary saying, hey, you have X amount of points because you made this purchase and that purchase. You want to make sure that you're getting their agreement to participate in those kinds of things. And then the other things that you should really be doing on the back end are making sure that you have a good security policy in place, and that can be implemented. Typically, you know, you had a policy at one level, procedures then another level down, that tell people on the security side that are responsible for your systems, tell them exactly what needs to be done. So you should have these access controls in place, or you should have this data encrypted. And yeah, you should just make sure that those things are carried through. On the privacy and security side, maybe train people. And I know that these, if you're a small to medium-sized dispensary, these probably seem like kind of intensive obligations, but they're really necessary. And they're not very much when you consider that if your data is breached, you're going to have, you know, you might have a state attorney general breathing down your neck. You might have lawsuits under California, CCPA, there's private rights of action for breaches. So you want to take it seriously.
And how much responsibility does the consumer have? Because one of the things that we see a lot is, the organization or the dispensary will write up this paperwork, right? And we sign the bottom line and don't read it because we just want what we want, right? Does that relieve them of any sort of obligation because they've given us the policy and we just signed on the bottom line because we wanted to get in, that which I think is quite common, right?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the answer is that, yes, it does relieve them of some responsibility, liability, obligation, because they've done what they're meant to do. They've informed the consumer of what's going to happen with the data. It's really up to the consumer. So this is where your point, how much responsibility does the consumer have? The consumer has to be responsible. And I understand the mindset of I want what I want, and I'm just going to either check the box or, not really read this. And I've been involved in privacy for 20 years. And if there's an app that I know I want or need and a privacy statement comes up, I'm just going to click through it also, because, unless it's something where I really have concerns, I know I need the application and I've got to click that box to get it.
My understanding of security and privacy is these systems are only as good as whether or not you actually audit them and check them. Is this something, they go through the effort of setting them up, but are they following up with testing them to ensure that they're secure? Do they conduct audits? What do you see?
I mean, that's really up to the individual entity. And I would say this, it's difficult for, a single dispensary that's maybe running everything off of, a very simplistic network, and they have maybe one IT person, or maybe it's an outsourced IT person. It's difficult for them to do those audits, but it's necessary, right? You want to look back, you want to check your logs, you want to make sure that things are as they're meant to be, that you don't have any unusual activity or intrusions, things like that. So you do need to toe the line, right? You can't just say we're doing this, you have to actually do it. And, an easy example, access controls. So here's the type of thing that might escape a small dispensary. They've got somebody, they have an employee, that employee has access to their systems, that employee gets fired or quits, and they don't have an IT person on site and they forget about it for a week or 2 weeks. And in this week or 2 weeks, that person goes back into the system and takes a whole bunch of data and does something with it they shouldn't be doing. So you need to walk the walk.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing we see commonly is, sharing credentials or sharing information, right?
Mm-hmm.
They may share a badge to gain access, or they may share a password because it's, I forgot my password, help me log on, that type of thing. I came up through the banking industry that, which is very highly regulated and very much understands data compliance and stuff like that. I think that would be overkill for the cannabis, especially at this stage, but will it move to that?
Mm-hmm. It might, and I think that the driver of that is going to be what we see in terms of breaches, right? So whether or not it's going to be regulated at a state level or a federal level, or it's going to be some industry association which creates some sort of self-regulation, I do think that as we see more and more breaches, something's going to happen on that front, and there will be requirements, whether mandatory, state, federal, or voluntary and highly recommended by an industry group. I think we'll see that happen.
I mean, I think one of the challenges is the nature of the breaches has been changing, right? It used to be that they would breach your company, steal the credit card information, and within 24 hours you could start to see the activity. So at least you knew when it happened, and you knew that it happened, and you knew it happened. The challenge now is the sophistication has changed, that they will do those breaches, and they will, that information won't appear online, which is how we typically understand whether or not there's been a breach. We see it somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And then what happens is we learn, oh, that data was breached a year and a half ago, and they've had that data for a year and a half.
Right.
I mean, that's sort of a changing nature. One of the breaches that we saw was the none of the breaches in themselves seemed all that surprising, and we didn't see them online. So we saw a breach of healthcare data, we saw breaches of financial data, and we saw breaches of bank data. Yet we didn't see the activity online, which
Right.
as a security person, you're like, they've taken it, why aren't they using it? Right. But what happened is they did numerous breaches, and then what they did is they aggregated these three pieces of information, because now you have the health record, the medical records, the financial records, and their financial statements, and then you can start to target people, like you said, with ransomware or other types of things. And you get a much bigger and better profile, right, when you start to aggregate data sources from 3 or 4 places.
Exactly. And there's no question that the perpetrators of these breaches are getting more and more sophisticated, just smarter. And it's more and more difficult to catch them because they're operating in cryptocurrency, so it's harder to track them. But yeah, look, the volume of data is attractive. And if they have a large retailer, that volume of data in and of itself might be enough for the perpetrator to get the value that they want. Or like you said, they may aggregate across, I don't know, multiple dispensaries in a region, and just optimize the value of the data that they can get there. And when I say optimize, it depends, I suppose, on what their goal is, whether it's to sell it, whether it's to expose it and cause damage to these individuals, or whether it's do something like, lock it up and do a ransomware type scenario.
And I think the other challenge too is that, we talk about these people collecting this data like they're these nefarious individuals, but for the most part, a lot of these people are big tech companies, right? Who I won't name because they'll probably want to sue me, but we're the people that are, violating our data on a regular basis are big tech companies that are just using it and selling it.
Absolutely. There's no question. I mean, look, you look at the biggest ones, you look at Google, they want to control all data, right? I shouldn't say all data, but they want as much data as they can get. And I'm not saying this in a to be disparaging to Google, but it's their business model to be the source of data for the world. So, it's just kind of an example, maybe the extreme case of what you're saying is the big tech companies, yeah, they want data, and the source of that data, it may or may not be important to them. But certainly, I think that there's a legitimate argument to be made that this type of data could be important to a huge aggregator.
And what makes the cannabis space different when it comes to data security and privacy?
Yeah, to me, the biggest thing that makes it different is the risk to the individuals, right? So you go into a dispensary, and maybe it's your regular dispensary, and you've been there 5 times or 10 times or 20 times in a year, and there's a lot of information about your purchases, which obviously imply something about your personal habits and things that you like and don't like. And as I said before, if that's disclosed, that poses a significant risk to the individuals. So, that's what makes it different to me, is the risk to the people who are to the customers. On the dispensary side, what makes it different is, just kind of the flip side of the same coin, which is there's a lot of data and there's a lot of value to that data. So there may be entities that think, okay, in fact, maybe I should say there are definitely entities that know that cannabis users are likely to be customers of their product as well. And so they're going to want to access that data, whether it's purchasing that data or, if somebody makes it available on, black market or whatever it might be, then they can use it there as well. So there are risks on both sides, right? Risk to the dispensary, risk to the individual.
And if someone hires a firm like yours, what are you typically providing for them?
It depends what they need, but the starting point for us is typically know your data, know where it's going, know what's happening with it. So we would generally want to sit down with stakeholders and say, okay, what is it that you're collecting? Are you collecting driver's license number? Are you collecting purchase information? Where is it being stored? How is it being stored? What third parties is it going out to? Do you have a loyalty program service provider that you're sharing the data with? And how is it secured along the way? Once we understand kind of that data environment, then we can help them put controls in place, the most basic controls that everybody is going to need, starting with a privacy policy, a publicly facing privacy policy so individuals are aware, then the internally facing privacy and security policies, and building all of that out. So building out procedures and helping them implement things like access controls, or if they don't have an encryption solution, making sure that they know what their options there and helping implement that. So it is from kind of the administrative point of view, knowing your data and putting the right controls in, all the way down to the technical controls and helping them make selections and implement.
And is this something that the industry is aware of? Like, are they seeking this, or they're like, we'll get to it when we have a problem?
So my perception is that they are looking at it much more in that second way. I think that there is a big rush in this business to sales and profitability, and totally understandable. People are seeing it. It's a bit of a gold rush, and compliance with laws or protecting themselves against what they may seem as a remote possibility of a breach, that's not the first thing in their mind. The first thing on their mind is getting sales and generating revenue. So I see that as a huge risk factor for this industry, the fact that it's a rush to profitability.
Well, Dan, we very much appreciate you spending some time today. I think you're going to be really busy in the near future, because I think that we will unfortunately see these breaches, and like you said, once they once they become vulnerable, then they finally understand, oh, I guess I should have done something about this. So I am sure that we will see. Again, what's the website if people want to visit you?
Yeah, it's cannabisprivacyandsecurity.com.
Okay, great. We appreciate that. We will put that down below so that folks can click on it and visit you. Again, we appreciate your time today, and we look forward to hearing more good things from you in the future.
Thanks very much, Mike. Take care.
Thank you.